Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Amy Berger. I am the Assistant Director of the American Jewish Committee Dallas Regional Office. I would first like to take a moment to recognize a few of our friends from the Diplomatic Council of Corps who have joined us here. Consuls General Hideo Fukushima of Japan, Honorary Consuls Pan Nu Pan of Cambodia, Sam Shijijo of Japan are in attendance. Thank you. Today, we will be presenting an important and timely discussion on the rise of anti-Asian hate. This program is convened by AJC Dallas's Community of Conscience Coalition and in partnership with the City of Dallas Office of Equity and Inclusion. With us here is Liz Cedillo Pereira, Chief of Equity and Inclusion.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, AJC, for bringing us together this afternoon and including me in this important dialogue. Thank you, Joel, for being a valued member of the city's welcoming task force. Again, my name is Liz Cedillo Pereira, and I serve as the Chief of Equity and Inclusion at the City of Dallas. My team's goal is to identify and develop strategies to overcome disparities and barriers our residents may face because of their identity or circumstance, and ensure equitable service delivery through data-driven approaches. Dallas, as you all know, has a vibrant and diverse Asian American Pacific Islander community that's integral to our social fabric. Asians have a long history in Dallas and in our country. In fact, J.L. Chow was the first Asian to be listed in the city's directory and opened Chow Chow Laundry at 904 Elm Street in 1874. The growth in Chinese business increased steadily over the decade following Mr. Chow's first enterprise. And by 1886, there were 14 other Chinese laundries that had opened in our city. This is the sort of resilient and entrepreneurial spirit that I had the privilege of observing for many years as an immigration attorney. Today, I will speak from partly that perspective. About 25% of Dallas's population is from another country. Almost 2/3 of the Asian American population is foreign-born, proportionately higher than any other group in the Dallas metro area. AAPI community members continue to be integral to our community, often serving on the front lines of fighting COVID-19. Among many contributions they're making, they are city officials, whom I work with proudly, public health officials, and healthcare workers, welcoming task force members. At the City of Dallas, we recognize the role we play, or we need to be playing, to build inclusive communities. The acute rise in hate crimes against our Asian American Pacific Islander communities in this past year is part and as a result of the broader issue of systemic racism and xenophobia against communities of color. When we talk about the hate crimes against Asian Americans, we also have to address systemic racism in a comprehensive way that factors in historical and intersectional context. And we must push for the use of disaggregated data at all levels of government to bring to light the depths of this crisis. We hope some of you on this call today will connect with us in our Office of Equity and Inclusion and join with us as we work to build an equitable, welcoming, and just city for all. Please stay in touch with our office, and I will include in the chat ways that you can be a part of what we're doing through our newsletter and by following us on Twitter and other social media outlets. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today, and I look forward to the dialogue. Passing it back to you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Liz. The AJC Community of Conscience was launched in 2019 to advance our shared values of pluralism, civil discourse, and mutual respect. Among its members are top faith, ethnic, civic, and elected leaders from around our community. We unite across these diverse backgrounds and perspectives to honor the American ideal as together we strive to form a more perfect union. Today, we will be hearing from a panel of distinguished speakers in alphabetical order. Stacy Cho Hernandez, President of the Dallas Asian American Bar Association. Tina Higley, Vice President, Greater Dallas Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce. Special Agent Mike HIllman of the FBI, Caroline Kim, Board Member of the Asian Chamber of Texas, Winston Lamb, Co-President of Ascend North Texas. These organizations, along with the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, the Dallas Regional Chamber, and the Japan America Society of DFW have all joined us as community partners for today's discussion, and we appreciate their support and partnership. A report from the National Coalition Stop AAPI Hate reported nearly 3,800 recorded incidents of verbal and online harassment and physical assault against AAPI individuals, up 150% from the previous year. Yet we know this is only a fraction of the actual crimes committed against Asian Americans that for many reasons often go unreported. In AJC's 114-year history, the organization has consistently worked for advancing equality and advocate of civil and human rights. We recognize that the fight against bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hate in all its forms is all of our responsibility. We are proud to convene this session. It is now my pleasure to turn the program over to AJC board member, Mark Platt, who is a member of the law firm Frost Brown Todd LLC, who will be moderating today's conversation. Thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Amy. Today's program features a panel of distinguished individuals representing the local Dallas AAPI community. Now that we have introduced these representatives by name, I would like to ask for each of our panelists to take a moment to tell us about the organization you're representing. So proceeding in alphabetical order, Stacy, could you please tell us?
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Stacy Cho Hernandez, and I'm the president of the Dallas Asian American Bar Association. We are a group of over 300 members, all of whom are in the legal profession, and we exist for the benefit of Asian American attorneys practicing in the DFW area, law students, and other legal professionals. We advocate for the interests of our Asian American members and attorneys and promote the professional growth and good community standing of our members.
Thank you. Tina?
Hello, everyone. My name is Tina Higley. I'm the Vice President of the Greater Dallas Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce. It was an honor to be invited into this discussion. First of all, I would like to thank AJC to organize this very timely discussion in today's environment. The Greater Dallas Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce is an organization established to provide a platform for Taiwanese businessmen, women, and professionals to exchange ideas, promote economic growth, and connecting between Taiwan and US. GDTCC are not just business driven. We're also doing a lot of giving back to our community. For example, we provide thousands of meals for our frontline heroes, donate masks and funds to various city government. We're driven to be a good global citizen. We are proud to be the model Asian American, and we are here to make our voice heard. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we are having some technical difficulties with connecting Special Agent Mike HIllman with the FBI. So moving on to, until we can get Special Agent Hillman connected. Caroline?
Thank you. I'm Caroline Kim. I'm a proud board member of the Asian Chamber of Texas, formerly known as the Greater Dallas Asian American Chamber of Commerce. We are one of the oldest Asian chambers in the country, operating for more than 30 years in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. And the North Texas region offers a wide range of advantages, including our diverse culture and access to Texas's most influential people, groups, and companies. The Asian Chamber's core values are tied to economic growth and development for Asian American businesses, and we serve our corporate partners as a connection to the Asian community. Elected officials and other government entities often look to us for guidance as we represent the voice of the Asian community in North Texas, and our mission is to advocate for its members and the Asian American business community while assisting the economic development in North Texas. We work to connect, educate, and empower the Asian American communities in the North Texas region and beyond.
Thank you. Winston?
Hello, and again, thank you for the invitation to join this very esteemed panel. My name is Winston Lamb. I am the co-president of Ascend North Texas. Ascend is the largest nonprofit that is dedicated towards building future pipeline of leaders within corporate America for Pan-Asian professionals. Last year, at the start of the pandemic, Ascend really laid out a very thoughtful approach to inclusive leadership and released the 5-point action agenda, where we had over 10 diversity nonprofits join alongside us in advocating for these 5 points, as well as over 120 corporations. I'll share about that a little bit later, but again, we are very much about building effective leaders, and we know that effective leadership includes practicing inclusive behaviors. So delighted to be part of this panel, and thank you again for having us.
Thank you all, and I do think we're still waiting to connect with Special Agent Hillman. So I will just say, before I get on with some questions for the panel, let me remind the audience that you're all invited to submit questions at any time during the program using Zoom's Q&A feature. So feel free to do that, and we are hoping to leave a little bit of time at the end to submit those questions to the panel as well. So beginning with my first question, I'd like to direct this to Caroline, Winston, and Tina. In light of recent events, there's so much to unpack around issues of overt expressions of bigotry and xenophobia towards the AAPI community. I'd actually like to begin by asking about some of the more subtle forms of discrimination that may fly beneath the radar. Has there been a noticeable additional impact on Asian American owned businesses that you believe can be attributed to the scapegoating that we've seen over the duration of the pandemic? Caroline?
Absolutely. Thanks for this thoughtful question. Yes, absolutely. We've seen an increase in temporary and permanently closed businesses, an increase in insurance claims because of vandalism, petty theft, and damage, lack of proper infrastructure and helping minority-owned businesses properly apply for and receive PPP loans and other assistance. We're facing language barriers, we're facing inadequate representation, other issues like that. And so anecdotally, business owners are also reporting an increase again in this vandalism, decrease in sales, an increase in harassment and prank calls, things like that. Something, as very small as that is demoralizing for you, for someone to be on the receiving end of that. And then on top of that, it's affecting their business and their income as well. So I think that it's just bolder. People are bolder. Where Asians and Asian Americans are being targeted, again, not just on the street, but again, through their livelihoods. And again, so many Asians and immigrants here are small business owners. So it's affecting them in every aspect of their life.
Winston, do you have anything to add to this?
Yes, and actually I'd like to look at it through a lens of history as well, because although these horrific violent attacks on Asian American communities are now being increasingly reported in the media, the truth of the matter is that these have discrimination, anti-Asian American discrimination has actually existed for a long time. So just the other night, I was actually watching the movie Night at the Museum with my children, and in it there was the character of Teddy Roosevelt, and he actually said this very poignant remark that that the more that you know about the past, it actually prepares you better for the future. And so what I'd like to do is unpack a little bit about the past, because I think that while many people think this may be a new phenomenon, I think the Asian American community recognizes that it's actually a repeated phenomenon throughout history. The first thing that I'd like to point out is that sometimes, even since the late 1800s, the very first law that was passed, the first restrictive immigration law was essentially the Page Act. of 1875. And that actually prohibited Chinese women from entering the country. That law was quickly followed by the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which actually extended that to Chinese men as well. The part of that happened during the period of manifest destiny, where essentially workers from foreign countries, many from China, came to help build the westward expansion for America as it was heading westward after the effects of the gold rush. And then subsequently, after many of these immigrants were actually barred from entering America, America actually looked to other sources of labor to fuel the needs of society. That led to successive waves of Asian immigration from different parts of the world, including immigration from Japan later on. And then the reaction to that was within a few short years was increased violence against the Japanese community. There was a movement of Sikhs to come to America to essentially be a labor force for America until the US Congress passed an act that included India as part of its new restrictive immigration policies. And then successive waves of Filipinos, and you kind of see the story. And then there was the Tidings-McDuffie Act that was actually passed that restricted Filipino immigration. So I share this in the context to say that we ought to look at this challenge through the lens of history, that there actually are undertones of anti-American sentiment that actually are systemically built into the system. And so that is these latest increase in escalation in violent attacks has just really shown the light on something that has existed for a very long time.
Well, I appreciate that, Winston. As a history major, I always appreciate knowing the history behind this, and I do think that that's it's not as well known just how far back the discrimination goes. So that's really helpful to have a brief explanation of that. Tina?
Personally, I would like to give people benefits of doubt. Maybe sometimes when I hear people say something, I will assume they don't understand the comment was being offensive. I think there's a fine line between curious about the Asian culture and being bigotry. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish. I don't want to be overreacting and just assume the other person is being racist. But there are also obvious common questions that you just cannot take it any other way as being xenophobia or racism. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Next question that I have that I'll start with Stacy and then see if anybody else has anything to add to this. Do you think that the longstanding stereotype of Asian Americans as the quote unquote model minority is a barrier to the reporting of hate crimes directed against the AAPI community? And are there other pressures that might further discourage members of the community to report these crimes? Stacy?
Thank you, Mark. That really is such a thoughtful and excellent question on this topic, a very important one. And as the name describes, it is not something that is actually real, but it is what some people want to believe about the supposed success of Asian Americans as a racial group. Some background on the myth: it was popularized by a sociologist named William Peterson through a 1966 New York Times article, and it's sort of stuck. It has been in the general public as a counter-argument for anti-Asian racism. It was used initially during the civil rights era to stymie racial justice movements, where examples of Asian American success were being used as a counter-argument of there being systemic racism back in that time. And the myth itself is that Asian Americans are more successful than other minorities because of something inherent to us in our culture. And the viewpoint is that Asian Americans have suffered discrimination, but we overcame it because we're hardworking, we're conservative, we're well educated. And the myth, while some people might think that's not a bad myth, it creates a fallacy that Asians are doing well and we don't need any help. Asian Americans don't experience racial discrimination or do not have needs that warrant societal and governmental policy concerns. And so it systematically excludes the reality of many working class Asian Americans, and it also excludes a specific form of anti-Asian racism against Asian women in particular, as we've seen in the recent events involving Atlanta, that's also intertwined with these issues involving gender and sexuality. The myth also is divisive because it creates tension between minority groups. The stereotype, it's been used as a tool to place other minority groups at a subordinate level. And that can create a negative narrative between the minority groups, which can also prevent us from coming together. I think it also creates racial resentment. You know, I'm sure many of us have gotten, you know, maybe you're working a little too hard, or you're an overachiever, or you're getting more than your fair share, or don't even bother putting your kid in the spelling bee because it's going to be an Asian kid who wins it. You know, it's tough because if you complain about the myth as an Asian American, people want to say, well, why are you so thin-skinned? Or isn't it really a compliment? So what are you complaining about? You're doing better than you would have been doing in your homeland, not realizing that America is our homeland. The result is, if we complain or have issues, we're ignored and it's written off. And I've heard many frustrations from my Asian American counterparts in many different industries experiencing difficulty with getting non-Asian colleagues to not only just understand, but even see what we're feeling and going through, recognizing that it's legitimate. And it's just a reminder of how hard it is as a minority to be seen. It's a struggle that is unfortunately not unique to Asians, but certainly is a struggle that is more pronounced lately. And so you can see how, when you understand the myth, how it gets in the way of not just reporting Asian hate crimes, but it prohibits a lot of people from seeing that there is a hate crime when an Asian person is involved. And if people are having trouble even seeing that an Asian person can be the target of a hate crime, then you can see why it's also underreported. On the second question that you had, I would just bring up, you know, there's this additional pressure that causes these kinds of hate crimes to be unreported. And that's if you're a child of a refugee or you're a child of an immigrant, we're taught you don't want to be seen. Be quiet, work hard, keep your head down, be that worker bee. So we can stay in this country, or so we can be left alone, or what have you. And I think many of us have unconsciously, or maybe perhaps even consciously, implemented that into who we are and how we live, you know. And as a result, I think lots of times Asian Americans often exist invisibly in the background. We're supporting, we're making things happen all around us, but we're not gonna brag about it. We're unseen, we're unknown, and it leads to us being misunderstood. And I also think even within the Asian American population, we have this mindset that, like, we don't want to recognize that racism is happening to us. We want to ignore it. We want to not talk about it. And that unfortunately perpetuates the problem and it becomes normalized.
Thank you, Stacy. I want to see if anybody else on the panel has anything to add to that, but I also wanted to, as a follow-up, add on the topic of this underreporting. Do you think that some of the outspoken voices that we've heard, particularly lately, particularly after the Atlanta incidents, from voices like Congresswoman Grace Ming, Congressman Ted Lieu, Senator Tammy Duckworth, actor Sandra Oh, and Daniel Day Kim, and NBA player Jeremy Lin, do you think that voices like that can make a difference in encouraging the more accurate reporting of these crimes. Does anybody want to give that a go?
Sure.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, yes, I do think it makes a difference. There's been too long, you know, Stacy, you mentioned Atlanta, but don't you know, he was just having a bad day. That's not a hate crime. That was just a bad day that guy was having. I mean, this is unacceptable now. There's this passive complicity, you know, and how citizens are responding that just we can't stand for anymore. It's too there, you know, too many lives are being lost, too many psyches are being broken, and reporting hate crimes and model minority myths. Look, if we don't know these stats by now, we all need to. Anybody who's listening, we need to know. Anti-Asian hate crimes have increased by 150% since the beginning of the pandemic. All right, so that's almost 4,000 incidents reported now by either the victims or witnesses. And again, those are just the ones reported. So we assume that there's a fair number of harassment or even, you know, more serious incidents that are not being reported. More than 500 of those are just from this year. So it has rapidly increased just in this year. What is the difference? What has happened in this past year? And I think we can look to a number of things. It's important to know also that Texas is the 4th highest state reporting anti-Asian hate crimes. This is happening very, very close to us. It's happening nationwide, of course. And I think that when we have strong, visible leaders in the AAPI community, like who you just mentioned, Mark, yes, it's absolutely important that they are being very, very outspoken about this, that we're being very loud. Again, going back to that model minority idea that we are quiet, that we keep our heads down, that we're submissive in some way. It's just not going to stand anymore. We just can't do that. Everybody needs to stand up, and we also need to know who our allies are as well. It's to that point. So I do think it makes a difference. I think it's really important. I think it helps victims to report these crimes, because for me, I'm not sure, you know, exactly why some of these hate crimes aren't being reported. I just assume that it's just, we're all human too, right? There's a shame, there's a fear involved when you've been attacked or a victim of something like that. There's, again, maybe a language barrier. Maybe there's an inability to maneuver the legal process. There's a fear of retribution, lack of resources. You know, all of these contribute really, really heavily to this problem. And I think that when we see people who are leaders in our community, in the entertainment world, in our political and government officials, when we see them standing up for ourselves and speaking out loud on our behalf, it gives us strength and motivation and the courage to do so.
Great. I don't know, Tina, did you, I think you were holding up your hand.
Yes. Huh. Okay. I was just following up on what Stacy and Catherine was saying, because I think the nature of the Asian community is generally are non-confrontational. We try to avoid conflicts as much as possible, and we don't like to cause trouble or being treated as victim. It's like, you know, that the famous thing says is lose face. It's like we are so proud, we don't want people to see us as a victim. So I think that also contributed to not reporting aggression towards Asian. And I think it's really important we need to educate people and spread the word to let everyone know that the Asian American know that we don't have to suffer in silence. There are people care and willing to help. And speak up and make our voice heard is crucial to change people's mind and action.
That's great.
Winston,
And
did you?
yeah,
ahead,
I just wanted to echo some of the remarks that were said and add a little bit more context on that as well, because it is encouraging when you are seeing people rise in prominence and using their platform, their opportunity to really talk to important social issues. I think those are role models that should be copied, and that it's our collective action, right? Not just the Asian American community in and of itself, but actually all Americans participating in the conversation in the fight for equity and inclusion in society, right? Making sure that all voices are heard. part of that model minority myth also pertains to the fact that that we have these biases, right? Our minds work in snap judgments where we try to understand the world around us with simple frameworks. And sometimes those simple frameworks glom communities together. For example, just saying, oh, that's the Asian American community. They're quiet, they're smart, right? So some of these stereotypes that you talked about, but this is really some of that outgroups, this psychology concept called the outgroup homogeneity effect, right? And which leads itself to stereotyping. But the truth of the matter is that the Asian American community is actually quite diverse. So I looked up how many countries there were in Asia, and there's actually 48 different countries that have their unique cultures, have unique faiths, have unique cuisine, have unique personalities, have unique things that they're proud of, right? And so actually the Asian American community is actually quite diverse. And because of the various waves of immigration that have happened into America, the Asian American experience is very hard to say that it's homogenous, right? In recent decades, there has been immigration policy that has really talked about, like H-1B visas, having skilled workers who are able to extend their stay in the country as they bring special skills and talents to allow America to continue to be that innovative force in the world, right? But the truth of the matter is that there's many communities that have multiple generations over time, and they have not had that same experience. They have actually experienced where it has been a fight, a climb, where it's sheer grit to stay relevant and survive in society, right? Oftentimes receiving less pay, less recognition, and less attention for their efforts. And so, the fallacy that is the model minority myth that tends to shine the bright light on the successful group, while ignoring kind of the fact that it's actually a very diverse group with very different experiences across history and across the Asian American community.
Great. Thank you all on that. The next question, I think, is one that's going to elicit some strong words. So I want to get to it. AJC, as I believe most who are listening into this understand, is nonpartisan. But that does not mean that AJC's leadership is reluctant to call out stigmatizing rhetoric by politicians. And I'm proud to say that AJC has consistently criticized the harmful language towards the AAPI community stemming from the pandemic. Based on what you have observed in the community, is this rhetoric just words, or have you seen or heard any concrete examples of behavior that can reasonably be traced to the use of some of this language? Let me start by asking Caroline if you have any thoughts on this.
I think we all have thoughts on this. We all have some strong thoughts. I think we're all going to reference a lot of the same things, political voices like Sarah Kim here in Texas. I'm sorry, that's reaching out to the low-hanging fruit who respond to that kind of rhetoric. It's so damaging. It's so hurtful. It's just a blatant example. It's just outright discriminatory attacks and language. And it doesn't serve a purpose other than to incite and to, get a little bit of press, in my opinion. And that's absolutely not what the Asian Chamber of Texas stands for. It's not what I personally stand for. And it is, I think, just wouldn't be happening. But it's someone's getting a voice, someone's getting a soundbite out there, and maybe for some news clicks or for whatever. But it's creating a very, very strong and negative ripple effect in our communities. That's reaching out far, far and wide. And I think, again, also what we've seen with the school teachers in Carrollton Farmers Branch ISD, It's a perfect example, again, of this more anti-AAPI boldness and rhetoric that's occurring at our community level, at the very micro level. I don't think we would have been seeing things like this pre-pandemic in such a way. That's my opinion. Now, maybe it's that they're just being reported more. Maybe they're just picking up, getting more press coverage. I'm not sure. But the bottom line is that it's creating a permanent damage to a lot of innocent people and communities.
Winston?
Yeah, I'll build on that. And thank you, Caroline, for sharing those examples. Words matter. The truth in that, words affect how people perceive the world around them, and it creates narratives. The inflammatory rhetoric is not helpful towards bringing a better understanding, and it actually, as Caroline pointed out, very more probably intended for getting eyeballs. But there's also a number of microaggressions, right? And the term microaggressions does not mean that they are small in impact in any way. These are microaggressions are daily comments or words that are used that are subtle, maybe not intended to create hurt or chaos, but in fact they do. They actually marginalize people, and it can add to the demonization of groups that are different than oneself, right? And so I wanted to provide a few examples of some of the language that may be used in daily life, maybe not intended with harm, but actually create harm, right? So if somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, you look foreign-born," that's kind of a and then there's a questioning of loyalties or where my loyalties lie. Maybe a person of color is assumed to be dangerous or to be labeled as a criminal because of their ethnic background. I've definitely heard the comment, "Hey, you must be good at science. Can you come help me with this math problem?" Or when people try to do imitations, right? That they might try to use a foreign accent to try and make light of a situation, and that's using humor at the expense of others. Your name is too long. Let's call you Sue instead, or let's call you Joe instead. All these things have the effect of marginalizing people, and I think those kinds of actions, when we see those in our daily lives, we ought to take action to speak out against those and intervene. There are some easy ways to recognize those and then also intervene using maybe like a question format, or just asking somebody to repeat what they said, because in many ways they may not even understand how hurtful some of those remarks can be.
Thanks, Winston. Sadly, the American Jewish community knows all too well the dual loyalty concept. So it's fitting you bring that up. Tina?
The saying pain is mightier than the sword is very true. Words are powerful, especially at this time of age. The social media and everything is under the spotlight. And mostly, I think when people are elected officials, their words carry more weight just because people listen. And you always have people look up for those elected officials. So I think it's our duty to call out the people using the words to discriminate and hurt people. And also it's our duty to commend those who use the words to lift up people and heal. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Stacy?
Yeah, I echo what all of the panelists have said. I mean, we really have to be more attuned to the varying levels of racism. As Winston mentioned, it can be as slight as a microaggression, or it can be a much more tragic incident like we're seeing in the news lately. I absolutely think that the rhetoric that was used targeting Asians with the pandemic has certainly emboldened people to be racist or hurtful in a way that I have not seen before, especially with the Texas congressional candidate that Carolyn mentioned. I just don't know what she was thinking, saying such a thing on such a public forum. It's just so, and the statements she was making, I mean, they're untruthful, they're hurtful, they perpetuate racism. The fact that she's Asian doesn't mean she gets to say the things she said, you know, and I certainly do not think what's been going on today would be going on if it were not for this context that we all have been living in with this pandemic since last year. And I think we have to be careful ourselves, you know, even to be careful with what we say, you know, don't call it the Chinese flu, don't call it the Kung flu, even in your jokes, because it's just not bringing positives, and it's just letting that fester and continue to go in a way that is not helpful to society.
Thank you all. I believe that we now have Special Agent Hillman on the line. That's great. Any other members of the panel want to add their 2 cents to this question?
So I have a teenage boy, and last week on our trip to Austin, we had a long time, and we actually had pretty good conversation about what's happening in the world, how that applies in the school context. You know, if he's heard terms like the Chinese virus, or if he had just returned back to the classroom the week prior. So I just wanted to see how he was reintegrating to in-person classroom experience. And so, you know, I think these moments are really important to, one, instill pride in your identity, in your cultural background, but also to equip our next generation on how to handle these kinds of situations, right? You know, I'm a big believer, I pointed out in the chat there, that I'm a big believer in the tolerance model, where when you see something, you have to recognize it for what it is, these microaggressions for what it is, and you can interrupt it. You can ask questions and force people to actually reflect on the words that they've just said. And so I think those are the kind of equipping that's needed so that we can actually be bold and help diffuse and de-escalate some of these possibly volatile situations.
Thank you. And does anybody else have just a 30 seconds to add or before we shut this down?
I was going to jump in. I've got 2 very young children. My oldest one is 6 and my younger one is 2. And she notices, you know, people have different colored hair, different colored skin. And I think we've gone away from trying to say, not noticing anything, like be colorblind. Like, no, yeah, they have different color, they have different cultures, but it doesn't mean make them any less. Like, you can't base your opinion on those differences. Yes, there are differences, but you can't base any opinion on those differences. I had to do a microaggression check myself, you know, during Black Lives Matter. I saw something saying, look at your child's Barbies. Are they all white? And so I went home and looked and I was like, oh, except for the Mulan Barbie, they are all white. And so even just like picking, you know, toys, you know, trying to be diverse in your toys, trying to be diverse in the books you read to your children, if you have younger children like I do, I think those are just small ways you can help them, you know, be more diverse and be more tolerant of that, and not be as willing to adopt stereotypes or quick judgments.
That's great. And I think we're at this point, we're officially running late. So I do want to thank everybody for being a part of this panel. Obviously, want to thank everybody who's signing as an audience member. This has been a very spirited discussion, and I really appreciate the time that everybody put into it. Thank you so much.
Hey, Mark, I'd like to give out my email address real quick to everybody, just in case anybody has anything for me. It's M as in Mike, E as in Edward, Hillman, HILLMAN @fbi.gov.
Wow, thank you so much.
You're going to get
Thank you very much. Okay, perfect. That's what I'm looking for. All righty, perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. Y'all have a good day.
Yeah, and I will pass it on now to Amy.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for staying with us. I know that we've gone a little over time, but there is so much to talk about. Really, thank you so much to our panelists, Stacy, Tina, Special Agent Michael Hillman, Caroline, Winston, and Mark. Thank you for being on our panel. I'd also like to do another thank you to our co-convener, the City of Dallas, Office of Equity Inclusion, as well as all of our community partners. Really, thank you for making that possible. Ascend North Texas, Asian Chamber of Texas, Dallas Asian American Bar Association, Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, the Dallas Regional Chamber, the Greater Dallas Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce, Japan America Society of Dallas Fort Worth. Thank you to our partners. Please visit ajc.org to learn more about AJC, as well as our initiatives that we were working on to combat hate. We will be sending out a follow-up email with more information about the federal No Hate Act that AJC is working to advocate for. We hope that you will be able to join the AJC Community of Conscience in being an advocate on these issues. We have a great Facebook page where all of our current events are listed. We hope that you will check that out, and we will be able to see you soon. Thank you again, everyone, for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your day.